Nuevamente, muy buenos días. Les damos la más cordial bienvenida a la conferencia
Good morning,
regional.
everyone. We would like to welcome you on this regional conference on migration. Today is Wednesday, the 16th of March. I am Luis Alonso Serrano, Executive Secretary of the RTM. It's already 9 and 7 minutes here in El Salvador. So before beginning, we would like to ask you to keep your microphones muted if you are not talking so that we avoid any interferences. So can you please mute your mics if you are not talking? Thank you. As I said, welcome again to this regional conference on migration. This morning, we're going to have the work group on protection of the RCM on the webinar for the delivery of results of the third Congress on Women in the context of migration, gender, human rights, and autonomy. Said Congress took place in Mexico on September last year. And precisely being March, the month where we celebrate the International Women's Day, this is why we programmed this webinar in order to take a look at the results of this third Congress. I'd like to let you know that we have a simultaneous interpretation, so you can choose the language of your choice on the horizontal menu. And in accordance with the policies of the RCM on the adequate use of information, it is forbidden to reproduce the contents either partially or afterwards through any media. All the information is going to be property of the members of the Regional Conference Migration countries, and all requests should be sent to the Executive Secretariat of the RCM. However, we'd like to let you know that in accordance to the interest, we will be recording this session, and precisely because of its importance, it would be subsequently available on the YouTube channel of the RCM. So again, please mute your microphones when you are not speaking. And to begin, we're going to listen to Cindy Mariela Portal, Vice Minister of the Diaspora and Human Mobility from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of El Salvador and Presidency pro tempore of the RCM, to share a message that was recorded this morning.
Amigas y amigos todos, quiero expresar
Dear
mi
friends, I would like to express my satisfaction of being able to participate in this encounter, even with this type of messages, because I know how relevant it is to position migrant women in a region. This month, in addition, it has a particular significance because we are going to celebrate the historical fight that we've had for equality of the rights of women in all societies. And without a doubt, we have still a lot to do. And this is the reason why these spaces for reflection are so important in the region in order to continue to raise awareness and promote these topics and actions. The report on migration in the world for 2022 indicates in relation to migration that they will be measured not only by the growing number of migrant women, but also because of the changes in the role that women play and the patterns when it comes to migration. And the foregoing means that women are going to make their own decisions, trying to look for better opportunities for them and their families. And experience shows that women are not in second place in order to make decisions. So since 2019, when we started promoting this topic in the Regional Conference on Migration, RCM, Salvador has been convinced of the importance to generate spaces for reflection aimed at this link between women and migration. So as Presidency pro tempore of the RCM, it is one of the most important topics to focus on gender. And this is the reason why we had this initiative to have continuity on this Congress of Migrant Women, to the extent that this is going to allow us to have an evaluation of the results obtained on this third Women in Congress and Migration that took place in Mexico back in September of last year. So
El Salvador durante ese año
for
2022.
the meetings that we will have next year, I want to invite all representatives of the member countries to participate actively, to provide innovative ideas and to break all these paradigms, to make a change in the region when it comes to the attitude towards women in migration. And to all of you, thank you in advance for your efforts.
Muchas gracias. Eran las palabras de
Thank you. Those were the words from Cindy Maria Laportal, Vice Minister of the Diaspora and Human Mobility of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of El Salvador. And now, to continue with the agenda, we are going to listen to the international organisms that cooperate in order to follow up on these important activities and topics. So now I'm introduced to welcome and greet Paola Cepeda from the International Organization on Migration and coordinator of the regional projects on migrant women. Good morning, Paola. Please go ahead. Hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you for this warm welcome. We are all so happy to be here again. From IOM, we're going to have an important participation and we will be introducing the results of all these studies on the risk factors that women are facing during the migration routes. We're going to have a two-part presentation. I have a team, a specialist in protection, and he'll be presenting first, and then I will continue with the second half. So welcome, team, and thank you for being here. Please go ahead. I can start screen sharing if you'd like to. Yes, I would really appreciate it. Thank you, and good morning from Milan. Thank you, and congratulations for organizing today's workshop, and always with the support of this technical secretariat. So along the line of what the Vice Minister said, this is a very important workshop, and we are really happy to be able to share with you part of the results of such an important study that we have conducted for the past months. And now Paola is going to provide more detail, but we believe that this study that is mentioned here regarding the update of the risk factors and needs for attention for women in Central America and the Dominican Republic, I think that it's so important because we've seen the needs of migrant women that are now growing because maybe there's a lack of evidence. So can you please continue to the next slide, please? Thank you. And to start, we have some figures to emphasize the importance of this topic and for a transition towards this study that we have conducted. Globally, we can see that in migrants, we have 48% of women. So we know that for the countries in the regional conference, I think that this is one of the corridors with the greatest migration flows. And they are moving north, mostly motivated by different factors. And among those factors, we have violence, insecurity, poverty, and of course, trying to find a better life for each family. And this is why the role of women is so important, because oftentimes they have like a triple role because they lead families in many senses, and they also needed to talk in the framework of reuniting families, and also they needed to make sure that the needs of the member of the family are met. And we also know that oftentimes, unfortunately, migrant women are more vulnerable than, for example, men. And this is something that we want to clearly emphasize today through the study that we have conducted. These last figures, because we could continue talking about figures, but we know that one of the things that we have been working most at IOM is precisely the smuggling, because we know that most victims that have been assisted by IOM are women. So figures are growing when it comes to sexual exploitation, which is really a concern for all of us. And talking about the dynamics of migration in the region, because you are all experts, so we are not going to go deeper into that. But it is important to emphasize that Central American countries and Dominican Republic are countries of origin, transit, and destination. And this is something that we see or saw in the study that we have completed. We also know that historically, we have two ways of migration, mainly because we have migration towards the north, as I mentioned, but we also have the migration towards the south and interregional migration as well. And this is something that we've seen mainly during the past year, because this is growing, it is more intense now, and we know that the next week the government of El Salvador and the regional conference are organizing a very important visit at a highest level of governments, precisely to have an exchange regarding all these topics and better understand the migration flows. So this extra-regional or extra-continental, it's a sort of a new phenomenon, but it has increased as well, even in the routes towards the north. And now we are going to listen to Paola so that she can continue analyzing and emphasizing that this study was in the framework of different things that we have identified. And something that I really like about this study is that it talks about the needs, but also about protection factors, because something important when it comes to migrant women in the region, we have different resilience factors. And now we are going to listen to Paola to emphasize that everything has been the work of Paola and her team. So it's excellent as part of this protection framework to take advantage of this study. So thank you. Thank you. I think that this is a result of the information that we have been able to gather from all the focal points that we had with all the member countries. The methodology of this study was to gather information from all the desks, but we were also able to gather information from focal points that you have kindly participated of. And before continuing with the results of the study, I would like to focus on the challenges that we have to face regarding migration data that are disaggregated by gender. And one of the biggest challenges that we found is that generating disaggregated data by gender was limited. So it was not easy for us to be able to conduct this analysis of data, because they are normally divided per person. So there's no specific breakdown by gender. So it was even harder, taking into consideration the diverse populations when it comes to gender. And something interesting was the intersectionality, because we have included different genders. So it was not easy to be able to identify all of these. And we also found some inconsistencies on the type of frequencies of measurements of data. So we were not able to conduct a comparison, because we have data on for 1 year, one way. So it was not easy to have a standard measurement. And this is the reason why this study was focused on a qualitative analysis and less on a quantitative analysis. And last, when it comes to the generation of statistics and disaggregated data at all levels, for example, when it comes to childhood, gender, basically, we saw that there was this void in the way in which we generate this data and how we gather the information. And we also found a big gap in relation to this study. As part of the main factors that of women being forced to migrate or making these decisions and why they make the decision to migrate, we have so many factors that are recurring on prior studies, and we have new ones as well. but mainly what women were saying, because we had the opportunity of conduct surveys with groups of women on different countries. And I think that this was something good, because at the end of the day, the information came from the voice of the women that were making this decision to migrate. So they were talking about improving the life conditions for their families. And this is something important, because we always say, well, behind the migrant women, there is someone, they are not alone, they have families depending on them. So they were also talking about the needs to improve, for example, food, education, health, and housing. And they were also talking about social violence in many cases, because they really felt that they had this high risk for their lives. And also when it comes to social and economic inequalities, like unemployment, not enough offer of services when it comes to education and health, and also the look for better opportunities and protection for their children in the face of some threats mainly. So when it comes to gender violence, there was an increase of the people or women that were saying that were migrating because of this type of violence. And we find physical violence, psychological violence on behalf of their mates. And then the impact on climate change, because we were able to interview women that decided to change because of things that were climate related, like storms and things like that. And also they had some frustration for things that were affected by COVID-19. When it comes to risk factors, and talking about how this is affecting and which are the main factors, we can mention that we basically have, this has been divided in countries of origin, countries of destination, countries of transit, and countries of return. And for any of these migration phases, we found different factors where women have told us that, for example, when it comes to the countries of origin where the trip starts, they were talking about sexual violence, interfamily and social violence, and the lack of opportunities and things that were reflected on other aspects. And also, they had to face organized crime, violence, kidnapping, and on many cases, disappearances of people, or mostly women. And at the countries of destination, they were suffering because of the stigmas, xenophobia, and abuse when it comes to work, sexual abuse. And in addition, discrimination, and on many cases, many of these women were had to resort to prostitution, and also a lack of opportunities for migration regularization. In many cases, when women were returning, the same conditions that made them leave were the ones that they had to face, mainly these causes that resulted in migration. And I really like the way in which we have updated some of these factors when it comes to the protection that these women had to go through. For example, the individual ones, and also those related to families and structural. And when it comes to individual factors, we can mention that as part of all these groups, the communication skills are something that has been strengthened, or somehow they have had to generate these skills to talk and try to better understand the languages of the countries of destination. And this was one of the problems that they were facing. For example, when we interviewed women from Haiti who were saying that this was the biggest barrier when it came to communication, or women that migrated to the United States or Canada also found this language barrier. So all the organizations and logistics when it comes to the trip or taking the migration route is something that they consider. So they had to prepare all plans related to migration and to make sure who they were going to leave, the documentation that they needed to have with them. So I think that it's important to listen to how these women are preparing these trips. And also, when it comes to awareness of human rights that these women are traveling with, because we found that of all the women that we interviewed, they were not aware of their rights. So basically, they feel that because of the fact that they are not migrating regularly, they think that they had no rights. And this is something that we were able to feel with all the different focal points. And when it comes to family, basically, the family networks and social networks are the support that they have for this migration project, and they are promoted by it. But also interesting and related to the fact that when they have a successful migration projects, but sometimes they not necessarily are going to be like an accomplishment of the dreams, so the affectation is even greater when it comes to family, or there is this great stigma in relation to the societies or the countries of origin. The power to make decisions is something that we were able to see because women are making decisions because of their own. So they are not doing something based on a decision made by a third party because they are aware that when they make this decision to migrate, there are some factors, structural factors that we were able to gather as part of this study, like access to justice, for example, in cases where these women have been subject to different types of aggressions or violations of rights. So we have these we still have this gap for them to be able to learn where they can report, where they can seek help. And we found that we still have many gaps when it comes to access to justice. And in order to have an organized and safe migration, we still have this myth about regular migration being impossible. So for women, when we were talking to them, I think that they were definitely saying, well, I rather take the risk and live with a coyote, for example, because I know that I won't be able to have this regularized migration, and the protection networks throughout the migration route is something that has been a key, because we found that there was knowledge on behalf of women of where they could find shelter and where they could sleep for the night, for example. And I think that when it comes to protection networks throughout the migration route, I think that this is something that they are aware of. And for example, one of the practices that really called our attention was the use of the information windows when they can have access to information, and also psychological and social assistance is one of the topics that we still need to work on, because even though there is awareness when it comes to this assistance, IOM launched this video of a Haitian woman, and I think that IOM also published this video of a woman that became a leader in order to support women through this psychosocial attention. So I think that it's important to take this into consideration. And so access to professional specialized teams for the attention of women And I think that for many years now, we have been taking important steps when it comes to the need for attention of services that are required by women as a result of gender or sex is something that is so important that we still need to work on. But this study emphasized the need for specialized services. That is something that we need to go deeper into and which is also necessary. And then when it comes to access to employment programs is something that also called our attention during this study, and also the protection spaces for women at their destination. As I said, it is really important that due to environmental reasons, they have been trying to raise awareness regarding how climate change has affected women and has had an impact on their lives. And throughout this study, we were able to identify women that had to migrate because of problems related to climate change, like hurricanes, drought, and there is this is a quotation that we were able to get from these focal groups. And migration due to causes related to climate change can also generate opportunities for empowering women. And also we can have empowered leader women that are going to help mitigate the adverse effects of this phenomenon in their communities. And this is something that we were able to listen to different testimonies of how women are taking care of water, and they are taking care of forests, and also they have to work in their communities in relation to be able, for example, of bringing the log for a fire, or if they need to provide food for their families as well. But this is something that has called our attention because we thought that we need more empowerment for living women that can take care of these natural resources in all their communities. So quickly, we have also discussed for the past 2 years because of this pandemic, but the study gathered some of the impact that this pandemic had on women. And as we said, we had these measures where we had to lose jobs mainly for women that were working, for example, in the tourism sector, and they had to be in isolation. And of course, this was an increase in intra-family and gender-based violence in all these families. And all these women that were working in homes also lost their jobs, and mainly migrant women that were a part of the chain of care at the country of destination, of course, had to lose their jobs, and they also had to go back to their countries of origin, losing in this sense or their livelihoods. And also, we have seen that the pandemic discovered inequalities when it comes to gender that had already existed before this pandemic, but were now more evident. For example, the digital gap, because we know that many of the measures that we were forced to impose when it came to isolation and when everything was digital. So we were aware of this digital gap, mainly for women. So it was not the mom, the one with the best cell phone. Sometimes they don't even have smartphones that are going to allow them to have a WhatsApp, for example. So there was this great digital gap that resulted in vulnerability when it comes to the generation of income through digital means for these women that wanted to get into it. So, and to close, some of the main recommendations are the promotion and design of interventions that are gender related. And one of the things that I already mentioned was the need to be able to differentiate services by gender. And our recommendation would be to keep on promoting this knowledge related to gender and migration, and to continue to strengthen the mechanisms that are going to ensure safe and orderly migration and people that are vulnerable, and to promote these services throughout the migration cycle, and also promote the initiatives for economic empowerment of women, which I consider to be very important. And now my colleague from Peru is going to talk now about how these women have lost their livelihood. So I think that it's really important to continue with this economic empowerment, and then the institutionality that has been created that needs to be adapted to the needs of migrating women. And this is what we were talking about, better services that will be aimed at the needs of women in this case. And obviously, not only to women, but there is this segmentation of services that should be aimed by gender, by sex, or by age. And now I am going to close. So thank you again for the opportunity. We are in the final process of validation, and then the study will be available so that you can read it. And in addition, we hope that it's going to be useful, because it is not a study from IOM. It is something that we want to be useful for all member countries. Thank you. Thank you, Paola and team, for this presentation. Paola, can you please stay online and introduce our colleagues from UNDP that are going to help us? Are you still here? Yes, I am here. Well, I am really pleased to be able to introduce Joanna, our colleague from UNDP. She has been working on different aspects related to this research as part of the Spotlight initiative that you as member countries have been participants, and also during the different focal points that we have had throughout the last year. So we have evidence and studies that have been supported by the Spotlight initiative regarding livelihoods, and also violence that these women have suffered. So good morning, a very dear colleague whom we have shared on different spaces. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for everyone for joining us. So thank you for the invitation. For UNDP, it has always been very important to take part in all these spaces on the framework of the Regional Conference on Migration, and specifically today to try and share these results of a study that was conducted and that I'm going to tell you about. So to begin, this is a study or initiative in the framework of the Spotlight initiative that, as you know, is an association that the European Union has with the United Nations system in order to eliminate all forms of violence against women and female children as part of the 2030 Agenda for Latin America. The focus at regional and sub-regional level, talking about Central America, Dominican Republic, and it is basically a series of studies and analysis regarding precisely femicides and feminicides at regional level as part of this migration vision. And this exercise has been led, in addition to UNDP, by women from the United Nations and UNFPA. So as part of the studies that we have conducted, UNDP led two of them, and these studies had a focus on violence suffered by women and children. So these are the studies that want to have an integrated vision, because we understood that with a single study, we were not able to address all the different variables and visions in order to try and understand that this dynamic. So we wanted to divide them. So we at the agencies try and lead the different studies. So because of the time limitations, we are going to concentrate on telling you about the first study that we have conducted. I don't know why this is happening, but this is the first study that we conducted: migration, trafficking, and violence against women. I don't know, for some reason, it's like I'm scratching this screen, but well, this study that was effects and consequences of migration processes on the incidence of violence against women and children and femicide. And feminicide in Central America, Mexico, and the Dominican Republic, even though it was led by UNDP, it had an important participation from IOM.
Gracias. El objetivo del estudio básicamente.
And the scope of this study was to generate information that is evidence-based, and that's part of the contributions of this study. So evidence to try and find the data to support all these findings and also decision-making when it comes to public policies. So the goal was precisely to generate information regarding how violence against women and children, human trafficking, illegal trafficking of migrants, forced disappearance, and violent deaths that are gender-related are affecting women and children when it comes to their migration processes. And as I said, this had a sub-regional coverage that was focused on the countries that you see on screen: Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Panama, and Dominican Republic. These are some of the realities that we started from for the study. So first, we cannot understand this phenomenon as something that is homogeneous. The different groups of populations, because we definitely, as women, are not homogeneous with the same characteristics, and everything is the same. So I think that this deserves a different approach, because we are not that uniform. So we must have an interdisciplinary approach to try and understand the cross-cutting realities. So the idea was to start from the reality that this sub-regional mobility, human mobility in Central America, is the result of different conditions and reasons. So people can decide to move clearly because of labor-related or education-related topics, or because their family or the head of the household migrates, so they decide to live with that person, clearly because of violence reasons. And just to mention just a few of the reasons, because we know that there are so many reasons behind it. And in addition, the reasons are less and less voluntary. And in addition, we are facing these conditions that are mixed with the situation. So it becomes a special situation for women, and the migration can be temporary, permanent. The women or little girls can travel unaccompanied regularly or irregularly, and they can also plan for their movements when it comes to migration. But the truth is that there is the biggest trend to be a migration of maybe not from one day to the other, but maybe pushed by circumstances. So one of the most important findings are the challenges that faced by women and children that are migrating from their countries of origin and are related. First, they have multiple causes. There is no preponderance. I apologize again because I think that the screen is being scratched. So maybe you can turn that option off. So thank you. So first, there are multiple causes. So there is no predominant factor on all the surveys and focus groups, any factor that was like the most important cause for migration. Of course, clearly there is something linked to the lack of jobs, but its preponderance is not as important, or not so many percentage points, but maybe discrimination, sexual violence, work exploitation, violence at home. So I think that all of these are very important because, of course, we have reasons linked to femicide or extortion and disappearance. So to begin with, this is telling us that the approach that we are going to have for this migration that is linked to violence, understood in its biggest sense, it clearly needs a response that has to be complete. It has to be comprehensive in order to try and basically, this is where we have the findings and recommendations of the study. So first, this is something that we all need to be a part of. It's not only about governments, because we are all the stakeholders that one way or the other are going to get involved with the provision of these responses. So first, we will need to expand the coverage of services in order to report, and also for the protection and attention of victims of violence against women and girls. And also we need to think that a big part of this study took place throughout the pandemic. So women were not allowed to go out and make a report, and then we need to come up with alternative virtual or digital online mechanisms in order to provide these services for them to be able to report. And of course, we need this trust also for the institution and different stakeholders for these processes. And something else is data. And also the main goal is for this study was to generate evidence-based information. And we need to work in a coordinated manner. And also when it comes to the systematization of information gathered, when we talk about migration topics, we all know that it is a challenge, but we evidently need to keep on joining efforts in order to have information systems that are going to provide important input for the answers, and in order to create public policies. And also, we needed to have this comprehensive approach, and we need to match, of course, the regulation framework, but also the protection systems that we have. Because sometimes these protection systems, because of the logic of these realities and immediate reaction that they should have, are going to take a look at this need to progress rapidly, but this is not the case for the regulatory frameworks, because sometimes these frameworks are not allowing for this comprehensive attention that is needed, and we need to have a dialogue between these two axes, protection systems and the regulatory frameworks, and I think that this is a pressing need. And also, we need to have a link between the work of the migration institutions, but we need to have the support and coordination of all the institutionality in the protection framework, the equality and development of women. So it would be like clearly promote these spaces for dialogue and coordination, and not only when it comes to decision making, but also at programmatic level for all the migration institutions, but also of these women-related topics and gender equality, both at national and regional level. So articulation is something that we need to have at all levels. And clearly, the municipalities need to find the support when it comes to the national logic that we are going to face in relations to violence against women and girls on those spaces for migration. And we know that an effort has been made, but we also consider, and this is something that we saw as part of the study and as part of all the focus groups, that the gender perspective at the end of the day, or inclusion, has to be strengthened by migration policies of the different countries. And clearly, it has a very important women component, but it also needs to be cross-cutting for populations like LGBTI+, and also to try and understand these realities. Of course, there are recommendations unrelated to all of this, which is budgeting, and at least we need to maintain these budgets that we're going to have for all these efforts amidst all this social reality that is quite complicated, but we need to keep on making all these efforts and not abandon all these financial efforts that we have for all these prevention strategies for violence against women that are mobilizing. And of course, something else that we can do is an exercise for the coordination, articulation, and mutual support among governments, the private sector, the different cooperation agencies, with the goal of looking for this budget, and finally the development of tools for monitoring purposes of violence against women and girls that are migrants, and with the emphasis on those critical times, and to be able to establish mechanisms that are going to allow to identify what is going on and what are the routes that women take, not only to file a report when they are victims of violence, but also how they start moving and what are the protection networks that we have in order to monitor this situation. And this is going to result in better responses and policies, and also in better regulatory frameworks for attention. Well, this is it for me. And of course, I am available if you have any questions, or if you want me to elaborate on the information. So thank you again. Thank you, Joanna, for your presentation. And again, I'd like to thank UNDP and IOM for the presentations. And now I would like to greet all officers from the different regulatory institutions of IOM countries that have been greeting us on the chat. Thank you for being with us on this protection group of RCM. This is the second hour of this webinar, but we would like to take a few minutes for questions and answers that you might have in order for Team Paola and Joanna to answer in relation to their presentations for the first half. So briefly, you can write down your questions on the chat or raise your hand. Paola, Joanna, you have any comments before we move on based on what we have on the chat? No, thank you on my behalf. First of all, I am really happy to see all officers from Women Mechanism or the progress that we've made for the past years, because the group is now multidisciplinary, and then we can have a better address of these topics. We have learned a lot in relation to migration. So being able to have today so many officers from migration and also on women-related mechanisms, I think that is definitely going to allow us to have a bigger growth. So some of the questions from UNICEF, in the case of the study, we were focusing only on women. We were not able to expand our study towards childhood. So basically, in this sense, we still need to have a more in-depth study of how little girls are being affected, but it's obvious that there is this trend, as Tim mentioned during his presentation on the first slide. These girls that are getting involved in human trafficking is something that we have implemented throughout this period, and we also know that because of COVID, is something that has increased, and this is something that we were not able to address for this first study. So, and we're also talking about women mechanisms, and I would like to greet all women because of the past 8th of March, in which we celebrated all the sacrifices and the work that women have done before us, and that results in our commitment to keep on promoting all these women-related topics. I don't know, Joanna, do you have any additional comments? Because as I said, this study is going to be available soon, for you to read it as the basis for public policies. Thank you. I wanted to mention that the study and the root of this question is going to include in some aspects a mention of adolescents and little girls. And the idea is to go deeper into this study, because we have 9 studies, so we are completing this stage before its edition and publication. But through Luis Alfonso, make it available to all the people that are part of this morning session and who would be interested in reading it. And of course, you are all welcome, as Tim said, when it comes to all the intentions to go deeper and try to understand all these exercises. We at UNDP, of course, are willing to cooperate with the governments and the different migration institutions and women institutions for all these research efforts. So you can count on us. And then as soon as we have it published, we will send you everything. Thank you. And we are now going to take 2 questions, and then we'll move on with the agenda. So first, we'll go with Katia Elisa. Please introduce yourself and tell us the institution and country that you represent, and then Valentina from UNHCR. Please go ahead, Katia. Good morning. Can you hear me? I work at the Institute for Women Development from El Salvador, ISDEMO, and this is the national mechanism that looks after the rights of women. And I have a very specific question. I am the coordinator of the Attention Center, and this is the area in charge of the attention services, legal guidance, and social support remotely. So it called my attention during the first part of the presentation when you were talking about the findings, where you mentioned that women were aware of where they could find shelter, and they were also aware of some apps through which they can ask for help. So my question is, if you have a report of document where there is a description of these services these women can have access to. So with the support of the IDB, we are about to start a pilot project for the attention of women in transit. So I am interested in getting to know which these apps are that women can have access to during the migration process, and that is my question. Thank you. Thank you, Katia. Valentina from UNHCR. Good morning, can you hear me? How are you? I am Valentina Duque, Gender Violence at the Regional Office of UNHCR out of Panama. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Paola and Joanna because of this important effort that is so relevant to gather information and data related to this process to strengthen the public policies and programming for the protection of migrant and refugee women. I wanted to mention that considering these multiple causes of this phenomena of human mobility in women, I wanted to tell you that we are available for technical contribution as part of all these processes, and also with all the members whom we are working hand in hand with RCM as well, because as you said, many women are moving from their countries because of different causes, including violence. And we need to take into consideration that we have accounted for 500,000 asylum seekers coming from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, in addition to the internally displaced population in some countries, and also those that are looking for the refugee status determination. So we must always consider that when we talk about migrant women, we are talking about refugee women. So we are always referring to how important it is to talk about women that are moving. When we talk about human mobility, we have diverse profiles in our population. And considering that we have a specific regulatory framework for the protection of refugee women, at UNHCR, we are available to support you all, bearing in mind that this can entail the strengthening of actions like the asylum system on the countries that are being hosts of these refugees. So that is everything again. Thank you. Thank you, Valentina. And if you allow me, we're going to take one last question from the chat, and then we will close. Anais says, thank you for this presentation. Could we elaborate on your conclusions and recommendations regarding access to justice on behalf of migrant women? So we have these three questions, and Carmen, no, Paola again, sorry, and Joanna.
Gracias, Luis Alonso. Bueno, nada, me voy a referir primeramente.
Thank you. I will refer first to the question from Ms. Demo. So, in fact, as part of the focus groups that we have with women, one of the questions that we were asking was, how do you communicate with your family, or how do you take guidance for this route? And we were surprised to learn that they were aware of MIGAP, which is where we can find some of the information windows, so where they can have information about shelters and in all countries. So I think that this was one of the ways that they mentioned they could use for guidance purposes in order to find shelter or to spend the night, or where they can ask for food, where they could find a hospital. And this is one of the things that they mentioned first. And second, it was interesting to learn that they had the real-time location, and they share this with their families somehow, so they could know where they were exactly, and to see them as they moved so that they can be located the country that they were in throughout this migration route. So basically, and something that also surprised us was the use of the social networks or social media for guidance purposes, because maybe they could find a place in order to get some food, like a supermarket or something else. And also they were using Google Maps oftentimes because they felt that they were afraid when they were being moved from one place to the other. Maybe they were inside a truck. So in order to have access or to learn where they were, sometimes they were using Google Maps. And of course, as I was saying, not all women have access to these types of apps, but it really called our attention because they get help. They rely on technology throughout these migration routes on one hand. And also, if you allow me, Joanna, in relation to the question when it comes to access to justice, I think that basically what we saw as part of the study is a recommendation to get to learn more about the reference guides at the different countries for making reports. And this is the reason why I am so happy to work together with migration and women mechanisms, because I think that this is going to strengthen the attention routes and of course the reference when it comes to access to justice when we need to file a report of a abuse or any crime that they have been a victim of. Thank you. Joanna, please go ahead. Thank you. Well, I would like to thank first the comment from my UNHCR colleague. Of course, working together as agencies is fundamental. And then we can keep on joining efforts and strengthening the work that we have conducted so far, mainly with this vision for the refugees and all the progress made in that framework. And second, I wanted to mention for my colleague from El Salvador asking about these apps. Well, we don't have it in our study, but UNDP has a project in Central America that is called Info Segura that has developed an app that is like a virtual assistant that basically is going to allow for a person from a computer to find a way to report gender violence, for example. And then they can have some guidance without asking for personal data. Of course, we can guide people so that they know where to go. And of course, through Luis Alfonso or Paola, maybe we can send you the information. And finally, when it comes to access to justice, I think that it's absolutely relevant. UNDP has been working strongly when it comes to the rule of law, including access to justice. And basically, the recommendations are related to getting to know the different routes and also we need to make sure that migrant women and, of course, the adolescents and girls to have access to justice service, so that we do not have requirements that cannot be met, because we need to ensure that they are going to have access to all these services. And in our opinion, it is also fundamental to promote the trust between the legal system and the people, because we need people to be able to trust that their report it's going to be kept confidential, and that is going to follow the due process. And I think that trust is basic for all of this. And also when it comes to the generation of information. For example, we need to systemize what happens with all these reports of violence against women and girls. Do we have the jurisprudence that is going to allow to open the road for the next reports of these types of crimes? We need to provide information and to make it social so that they are aware of what is going to happen. We need to build a trust. And in our opinion, these are specific recommendations for everything related to access to justice. And finally, for Amparo and Glenda's questions in relation to what happens if they have no internet access. I am pretty sure, well, of course, I'll have to double check, but I am pretty sure that this app, InfoSegura, it works without data consumption, and that this way people can have access to this app with no need to have internet access. But I need to double check. I can take a look at it, and then I can send you all the information regarding the specific apps, or I don't know, this I don't know, virtual assistant. It's called the Eva or something like that, but so that you can take a look at it. And of course, get all the input necessary for these recommendations, because this is what this is about, to improve as we progress. Thank you. Luis Alonso, I just wanted to mention that in the case of MIGAP, it works with no need for internet access. But throughout our research, it called our attention that women were saying that every country that they go to, the coyotes give them a new SIM or chip with internet access, which really surprised me. Okay, thank you both for all this information. And we are already on the second hour of this webinar. So thank you everyone for being here, and I will continue with the agenda. I want to introduce Ana Irma Rodas, head of the Human Department in El Salvador, and also coordinator of the work group on protection. And she's going from the RCM for the attention and protection of women in the context of women. Please go ahead. Good morning, and thank you everyone. Particularly thank you for moderating this workshop. In the framework of the protection group, we are really happy to have the first activities in the framework of the presidency pro tempore of RCM. We have a very busy agenda for the different groups that we will be working with and the different topics. And I also wanted to greet all member countries of RCM, international organisms that have joined, because the two studies that have been presented by Paola and Joanna lead to the different initiatives that we are working on at country level in the RCM framework, because we have these initiatives that can definitely be cross-cutting in the region in order to provide additional support in the work in the region when it comes to migrant women, and it is also cross-cutting for little girls and adolescents. So my participation is going to be general in relation to a recap of how we have been working with migrant women, and specifically in relation to the 3 congresses that we have held in the framework of RCM. Our colleagues from the technical secretariat are going to help me with my presentation for you to have a look at the context, because at the end, we're going to do a small recap, and I wanted to mention what we are considering when it comes to work in the preparation on the 4th Congress on Women Migrants here in El Salvador. We do not have a specific date, but I'll let you know. Again, I think it's going to be in June. And this is something that we'll discuss later on. So a brief timeline of congresses of women in migration context. This is the first context under the presidency pro tempore of El Salvador back in 2018. And as you might recall, many of the officers that participated on this process, and there was particular emphasis on working and approval the guidelines for the protection of women migrants. And this is a document that the countries in the region have adopted, and even though they are not binding, many of us are taking them to practice and implementing them in relation to the different options and processes that we are working with the different institutions. And these guidelines are also available for all of you to have access to this document. And you can also implement all of these at your different institutions, and for all of us that work with migrant women. In 2019, we held the second Congress in Costa Rica because they had the presidency pro tempore, and the work was hard, very articulated. Of course, we were exhausted because we held so many discussions, and it was a workshop where each of the countries made available the best practices regarding how we could work with migrant women, but at the same time, we were working to try and set the guidelines for attention and protection. And we gather recommendations that have been implemented for the different countries, and then they will be reviewed with the next presidency pro tempore, so that we can move from recommendations to practice, but also to the operability based on the different realities of the countries in the region. Next, please.
Pueden pasar la siguiente, por favor.
Next slide, please.
Gracias. El último congreso que se realizó.
The last Congress took place last year within the framework of the presidency pro tempore of Mexico. It had great acceptance, and we would like to thank Mexico for the support, and it was related to the guidelines, of course, but more specifically, we discussed the context of this COVID-19 pandemic and how countries in the region are addressing this topic in relation to migration flows, and how we are contributing, assisting, and protecting women. But we also discussed that we protect not only women, but also girls. And this is something that we have received questions in related to, and all the studies that have been presented, because even though it is true that we have migrant children, how can we include this in the next Congress that we're going to have, to be able to link all of these, because these are things that are cross-cutting, and we work directly in assistance and protection in countries of destination and transit. Honduras, for example, Guatemala, and all the different countries. But the idea of these congresses is not only to have just an extraordinary statement, but how can we implement the different guidelines that might be a proposal or a plan, I don't know. But this is why this is one of the goals of this webinar, for the countries to be able to contribute with their ideas, and that we, as the presidency pro tempore, to contribute to the fourth Congress that we'll have in El Salvador.
Dentro de estos congresos,
As part of all these congresses, and we'd like to thank Paola for her help, we have the systematization of information, because we know that human rights are cross-cutting for all the public policies. And when it comes to the guidelines that we work with that are gender-based, because more and more we have these public policies to try and be cross-cutting when it comes to gender, and to be able to have all the tools and new procedures that we are working on. And in here, I am going to mention what Katia mentioned from El Salvador, because we are promoting and actively working on this initiative through these projects. So maybe later on, we can discuss with Paola and Joanna all of these topics, because we need to optimize resources and cooperation so that we can better apply everything, and to learn how we can apply all these apps that have been mentioned, so that we don't have to start from scratch. And this is a pilot project, and we'll let you know once we have implemented it, because we are still in the phase of construction, but we have really advanced. And as for empowering, when it comes to human mobility, we have discussed how we can strengthen, support, and empower women in a positive sense, so they are no longer be victims of gender-based violence. And we are taking also a look at the migration routes that are more and more complex, and the situations are more humiliating. There is much more vulnerability of rights during these migration flows. And I am only going to mention the first Congress. We talked about labor rights, labor migration, and this is the reason why so many countries are working on a look at migration that is going to be safer. And of course, we are going to talk about the different programs that we are working on when it comes to labor migration. And then the link between gender and migration, and also gender-based violence and access to justice, of course. And then integration, empowering, and definitely we have human trafficking and smuggling. And we also have an articulated work on behalf of RCM in relation to these topics. And I think that this is all part of the context where we have a particular situation, and we need to define how we are going to address and deal with this unfortunate crime that is quite complex and has so many ties to other crimes. And Congress number 3 on Mexico, there was a discussion about the impact and challenges in the framework of COVID, and how the countries that were not prepared for the migration population, and specifically women and girls. And this was a very interesting and enriching debate, because definitely we were, as we talked with Paola on the framework of this Congress that we are going to have, we have also asked for officers of the Ministries of Health to take part of it because they took care of this pandemic, because we have the Ministries of Health participating, and also Mexico had this special section related to COVID based on the different realities that we have, because definitely we need to get used to the rhythm of this pandemic with all the biosafety measures to see how we can make it cross-cutting when it comes to COVID and the attention of migrant women. Next, please. I think that this is the last one. The impact of the Congress of Women in Migrant Context. First, to have a visibility of the need for cross-cutting gender in our work plans for CRM, and this is something that we are currently working on to see how we can make it more visible and how we can implement the different plans and actions that we have defined for the countries, and how we can work on all of this when it comes to the attention of women and also the positioning of women, migrant women, as part of this agenda. And we know that we are going to have different spaces at international level. And we have something in particular because we have to analyze how we are implementing gender topics in all countries. So definitely, as a region and as the presidency pro tempore, we have this great possibility through RCM, where we have 11 countries. I think that it would be quite practical to come to an agreement, of course, according to the needs of each of the countries, to have this positioning regarding this topic. And this is how we are taking a look at. Team already proposed that for next week, we're going to have a meeting on site at the border with Darien, where as a region, we're going to take a look at the migration topics with Panama, and also to position the vulnerabilities of the different migration focuses in the region. And then we are proposing to go beyond all of this in order to have a declaration, but also specific actions that we are going to work on with the protection groups, and what you are going to have as a proposal so that you can take a look at it. And then how can we get more key stakeholders for this process in order to have the cooperation mechanisms linked to attention and protection. And we would like to thank the cooperation agencies, but also the civil society organisms that are working to see how we can get involved. And I think that it's a great challenge in the region to keep on adding key stakeholders in order to provide a better attention and protection to women in migration. And in here, maybe we can have a new set of tools beyond the guidelines, but as it's not about the generation of documents, but how can we start working and improving what we already have and to adapt it to the new realities of migrants. Next.
Bueno, aquí quizás no me voy a detener mucho.
I'm not going to stop here because I think that this presentation is going to be sent to you. So as you all know, we are working on with different groups in the framework of RCM for the region. And we have a section on protection, on border protection and labor migration. And in accordance with the working groups that we have on the different areas of RCM, we have protection, We have irregular migration, and we also have labor migration and borders. So there are a series of recommendations and priority actions that were raised. So if we read them in all the countries, then we'll start working on these actions. But how can these actions be exchanged in the framework of RCM as a region for the implementation at regional level? Because there is much talk about these workshops that we are going to have in the Americas. And this is one of the things that we are working on in order to be able to continue with this workshop. And we have another one for this year. How can we can make use of and leverage all this cooperation so that we can do it in a more integrated manner? And then we also have a workshop for best practices on sustainable protection of girls and adolescents. And I think that this is something that each country has been working on, and also at regional level, maybe we can do more. So we have all these recommendations so that you can take a look at these priorities, and many of them took place as part of other presidency pro tempore, and now it's going to be led by El Salvador. Next, please. I would like to thank Paola for all these efforts and for making this comparison and all the conclusions from the second and third congresses for women in the migration context. I'm not going to read these all because we do not have the time, but we want to have your contributions, and this is what this is about. We needed to listen to all of you so that you can give us innovative ideas that we can implement for the next Congress. These are some of the conclusions. We've had these congresses in Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Mexico, so this is now common practice. And maybe next time Panama is going to hold the presidency pro tempore, and this way we can work with human rights in relation to women. And we also need the synergies in order to work with migration, and also the guidelines for protection and attention. And it is also important to have this approach in the region in relation to women in order to have all the transformation at the countries of origin, transit, and destinations, because I think that this is the migration cycle related to integration that we have at regional level. And also, I'm going to skip the articulation of all these efforts because I think it's important, because if we do not concentrate at country level, then we can double efforts. And as an example, that was generated 5 years ago. So maybe we're going to keep on working on all of this. So how can we have a better coordination and cooperation for everything that we do in order to have this important approach, comprehensive approach? And in here, we have the availability of the different studies that we can share with all the member countries, because many of us are interested in reading it. And of course, we'll be waiting for Ivan's presentation, because it was really good, and I think that this can be beneficial for the region as a whole. Next slide, please.
Bueno, ese es el tercer congreso.
That is the third Congress
que se dio en México.
that took place in Mexico.
Pasar a la siguiente, por favor.
Next, please.
Bueno, el de México es el más reciente, el año pasado.
This is the most recent,
Bueno, agradecemos
last year.
también por todo el apoyo.
And we would like to thank Mexico for all the support that they have provided for the presidency pro tempore of El Salvador with technical support
También comentarios respecto a cómo ven a
and for all the comments related to all these topics that we as presidency pro tempore, along with our allies, can meet with all of them in order to have action with the different work groups that we have at this presidency. And one of the recommendations that we came is gender related and was mentioned in the first and second congresses. So it's a recommendation for the third one. So how can we promote cooperation between the key stakeholders and international organisms? And how can we train the personnel at the different institutions for the attention of migrants and also the first line personnel, because they need to be training the trainers. We need to share all that and transfer all this knowledge. And also the idea is how can we optimize all these processes. And also one of the topics that we have, how can we encourage all of this when it comes to the attention of victims? And we also need to have all this mapping. How can we apply this to the region? Maybe, I don't know, maybe we can come up with a tool that is going to be user-friendly, where we can have all that information as an effort that we'd have in the framework of RCM and the COVID-19 pandemic, where we are looking for more stakeholders and to be able to continue. And also we need to have regional agreements with all the countries when it comes to the attention, of course, and we need to create a regional platform in order to exchange information, particularly with the consular authorities, with the member countries for the countries of transit and destination, and also promote within RCM some lines that we have heard because we are now promoting everything that we are working with Honduras. So we have this information that we can retake and make available for the whole region.
Siguiente, por favor.
Next, please.
Esas serían como las recomendaciones que salieron.
These are the recommendations that we have from the different congresses, and why we came up with a brief summary of all the congresses. Because the idea of this webinar, in addition to the interesting presentations that are going to be a supplement to what we want to work on, is to be able to listen to you so that we can learn how you see these congresses and how can we provide like a plus for all of these, because we have some ideas that we will mention at closing. But we wanted to have definitely this dialogue, and you can contact us through the technical secretariat in case you have an idea or comment that we would like to share with us, and we'll take it into consideration. So I think that this is it for me, and we'll continue with some of the comments. and also international organisms. So thank you. Thank you, Ana Irma, for all this summary of the efforts made by RCM and the systematization of the 3 congresses for women on migration. And we have a few more minutes left in order to have a dialogue for feedback purposes. And if you want to share some ideas with you or initiative in the face of this 4th Congress, and this is something that we wanted to do. And this is why, before we have this 4th context, we want to hear from your ideas. We listen first to Mexico, seat of the last Congress, and then the National Women Institute, for them to share some of their best practices. Please go ahead.
Hola, muy buenos días. ¿Sí me escuchan?
Good morning, can you hear me?
Muchas gracias. Pues bueno, antes que todo, transmitirles
I wanted first to convey the greetings from the director of this group. I would like to thank everyone for the presentation of the studies that you have coordinated, mainly from IOM and UNDP. The truth is that this is something that we want to go read in depth, because they are going to provide a general vision of interesting topics for our institute, and specifically regarding the different types of care, which, as you know, Women's Institute have been sharing with different countries in the region because of the right to be taken care of and to take care of others, and the need for a system that are going to have the need to work in a specifically aimed on this economic autonomy. So as Ana mentioned, I wanted to say that one of the results from the 3rd Congress specifically was an extraordinary statement. It's not just about approving this declaration, but we need to follow up on all these declarations. And from the government of Mexico, we have been following up specifically on the 3 main points that are a priority. The first one is to promote and protect the rights of women and girls that are migrating, and also to make more visible the risks that they are facing and that makes them more vulnerable, because we have not only women, but also little girls. So we need to specify all of this when we are talking about the follow-up to this declaration. And there is also a commitment to provide better welfare conditions in compliance with the guidelines for attention and protection of women in migration. So I think that this is important for Mexico to follow up on all these guidelines and specifically implement them and apply them formally to generate other alternatives to strengthen public policies, and also to cooperate with other countries. And finally, the commitment to promote measures to ban discrimination, and also the work that we have been conducting at the countries of origin, which was one of the priority topics during the 3rd Congress that took place here in Mexico City. And I would also like to thank you all for your support for this 3rd Congress. And of course, we'll follow up on all of these, and we'll pay attention and support to El Salvador for the 4th Congress. And if you allow me, we'd like to follow on this declaration that we approved. We at the Institute are promoting a specific program. So I would like for my colleague, Mera Navarrete, a technical specialist in migration, for a brief presentation of the project. Thank you. Alejandra, are you there? Alejandra, I think that you are muted.
Ok, ¿ahí me escuchan?
Can you hear me now?
Ok, Bueno, les iba a presentar.
I wanted to present to you a project, but unfortunately, I'm having some connectivity problems, so I'm just going to tell you about it. For, as Carla said, in the framework of the commitments that we have taken on during these congresses and as part of the regional conference, in that sense, the National Women's Institute in Mexico have been working on the development of a special project based on gender and migration that resulted from a session of these migration processes. And now that we are more and more looking at what our colleagues have explained from UNDP and the different agencies from the United Nations, I see that we need to have women as key agents for migration processes and as key agents to have an incidence on decision making for the social, political, and economic aspects. Sorry to interrupt, but we have some feedback. I don't know if you can close the audio of your computer, please. So as I was saying, we need for women to act as key agents when they are part of these migration processes for decision-making purposes on the political, economic, and social environments that will allow for the execution of migration public policies and those that are related to social development, incorporating the gender perspective. And in that sense, and taking into account the access on welfare that we consider to be so important, like documentation, health, work, and of course, care. We have considered as part of all these special projects, 3 components in order to be able to generate it. And as I already mentioned, UNDP and IOM, it's necessary to have quantitative data for decision making at institutional level that are going to lead to implementation of a strategy that's going to be comprehensive for women migrants. And at the same time, we need to promote the institutional strengthening with a gender perspective for all those public institutions that are taking care of women and girls in order to have equal access to programs and public services that we have in Mexico. And that this way, the topics addressed by this project are 5: prevention of sexual violence against little girls, adolescents, and women in part of migration, access to decent work, education, and care of their children, and or those that depend on them, like little sisters or brothers or people with disabilities that they need to take care of as women. And also to provide the timely information regarding their rights, programs, and services that they could have access to. And because they are not committing a crime, on the contrary, they have rights that they need to exert, and one of them is access to equal opportunities. And also the last topic that is quite specific that we have considered as part of the project is to contribute to the generation of mutual support networks for women migrants to see how we can promote for these women as decision makers, because they are going through the migration process themselves. They can come up with all of these, and as a result, for special projects of the National Women's Institute in Mexico, for 2022, we have generated all these special projects that at the same time consist of 4 software projects when it comes to the development of a model for mental health of women migrants, and also the implementation of an action route, and also the attention processes, and also the promotion of rights implemented by a multidisciplinary team that consists of 3 people: a coordinator for the promotion of human rights, she's a psychologist, and also a community cultural manager. And the last part is so important for the team because the team, the goal that we have is to allow for the development of these routes and models in such a way that we can have the integration or insertion of migrant women and also little girls when it comes to all these cultural and community related aspects in Mexico, because we know that all of these, as has already been mentioned today by UNDP, we have discrimination. So, and finally, we also have another project where we have a strategy for the prevention of sexual violence against migrant girls, adolescents, and women based on 2 components: the strengthening of the economic autonomy or independence, and an alternative care model that is going to allow, by linking these components to this strategy, it is going to allow us to generate an economic independence of women when it comes to self-employment. And at the same time, we need to have this alternative model to take care of those that depend on them so that they can have access to all these opportunities. And in that sense, and we can mention that all these projects will be pilots throughout these years so that we can get to know the results and to see all the adjustments that we need to make when it comes to these special projects in order to make it more effective. And this way we can replicate it not only at macro level in Mexico, but also at international level on behalf of the different countries, cities, municipalities. My colleagues from the UNDP and IOM were saying, of course, we need to make some adjustments to the migration context. So I think that it's important to replicate it and to adapt it to the different migration processes. And I think that in general, this is what this project is about. Thank you, Alejandra and Carla. Please send your presentation and socialize it, that then we can use it for input purposes for the 4th upcoming project. We have just a few minutes in order to share some ideas. And I got a message that we will be receiving written suggestions for the 4th Congress. So this is not the end, this is just the beginning. This is going to continue. So you can send your comments or suggestions or contributions so that we can work together on the agenda of this 4th Congress. So we heard that Costa Rica will send it to the Executive Secretariat. And also Valentina is sharing on the chat some ideas on behalf of UNHCR that are so important when considering internal violence and the causes for mobility, the reason why so many women are seeking refugee. And we'd like to thank your support for the 3rd countries where we have the testimonials of different women and they were able to share their experiences. So now, if one last comment, you can send them to the chat or raise your hands. Deula from UNICEF, please go ahead. Hello and good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for this space for the president on behalf of the presidency pro tempore. Thank you. I am really pleased to listen to all the experiences and reports, and specifically the last one that was presented by the government of Mexico. I think that they are all excellent, and they are going to pave the road not only for the fourth conference, but also for and strategies in the region. We've talked about women, and I think that we have mentioned all topics, but I wanted to see how we can differentiate between women, adolescents, and little girls, or those that are returning, or can we apply different programs and strategies and to create the different tools for the different situations. And of course, to have a special dedication on this fourth Congress for adolescents, because I think that those that migrate and who are unaccompanied or separated, so that we can take a look at how important it is to identify them at the border and in their countries of destination, so that we can offer adequate services for them based on their age and gender. Thank you again, and congratulations. Thank you, UNICEF, and thank you, Debla. Any final comments? Any final comments? We are running out of time, so if you don't have a chance to talk today, we're going to be able to do it on the upcoming weeks, and then you can send your comments, contributions, and ideas in writing to the Secretariat in relation to the fourth upcoming progress. I see no more hands. Ana Irma or Paola would like to make any final remarks? Hi. Thank you for the comments that we have received. I would like to thank Mexico for the presentation of this project that without a doubt is going to be so important, and maybe we can contribute with all of you in order to go deeper into it to see how we can start implementing all these projects and programs at the presidency pro tempore level, so that we can have it available for all countries in the region. I think that this is we have enough information for the time being. These studies had given us so many important information that we cannot wait to read them. And I think that all these tools and studies are going to be very useful when it comes to the work plans that we have at the different institutions, and specifically to be able to provide recommendations for this fourth Congress, and in order to have an excellent product within RCM when it comes to this topic in particular. I would like to thank you, and then we will be waiting for your comments in writing. You feel free to send them so that we can have an exchange of ideas and what you're thinking. And we want to go about a process for the construction of this fourth Congress, and we want it to be democratic and inclusive with innovative ideas, and of course, cross-cutting with products that we. And the idea that we are still considering, something that we have discussed at our different meetings, is that for this fourth Congress, that we are currently going over the agenda, but in order to have just an idea, this will be planned for the 13th to the 16th of June, but this is just something that is not final yet. And this is the proposal that we have for now, but has not been defined yet. And we also wanted to have this Congress that is going to be based on the theoretical aspects when it comes to sharing best practices, but we also want to have an on-site visit when it comes to women. So we are currently working on the design, and I will need the support of the steering institutions in our country, and we need to work with migration and all the women institutes, and that is what we want to do. We do not know if it's going to be a 2 or 3-day Congress. That will depend on the budget, of course, and everything that we can get. Mexico has held the presidency pro tempore, and they know that we have so many responsibilities when it comes to budgeting, but we have not defined yet if it's going to be a 2 or 3-day Congress, and this is how we are going to make a proposal. But what we are clear on is that we'll go from theory to practice on the territory. So this is what we have considered, and this is why any comments can be welcome and useful for the proposal. And as feedback so that we can start working on the agenda that can be implemented, and that where we can take a look at the impact and resources when it comes to migrant women and adolescents, and to make all of this visible, and to have your recommendations and comments regarding the types of products that we can introduce as part of this Congress to make it available for the whole region. We all know that these are all agreed upon things, but we also need to start working at country level and to define the products and results that we need to work on. And we're also working with the analysis units to start working on the matrices that we want to have in order to gather information. So we already have a very clear idea, and hopefully we'll be able to implement it along the way with your support and help. I think that this is something that will make possible. This is everything for me. I don't know if there are any other comments. We have taken note of everything that has been said in relation to the implementation of the projects, and to take a look at all the work that we have to do at the protection groups when it comes to migrant women. And Paola is going to work hand in hand with us. We are currently working on the technical secretariat, and this is what we have been working on, because we have different activities. And as you see, this is a great deal of work. We have workshops throughout the year when it comes to integration, children and adolescents, and also for the different groups, cross-border management, and many things. And we have other actions that are necessary when it comes to trafficking and smuggling, and the different activities that we have for the upcoming months, and which we will be sharing with you as focal points. This is it for me. Thank you again. Are we closing? Because I think that we have come to the end. I just wanted to invite everyone to join us for the financing of this fourth Congress that we hope will have in El Salvador as the seat. And we are all invited. Thank you, Presidency Pro Tempore. I would like to thank everyone for the presentation of these initiatives, and a big hug to you all, because we are still in the framework of the celebration of March 8th. So a big hug and thank you all. Have a good day. Thank you, everyone.
Lo que pasa es que lo estaba dejando de último.
Well,
Ese llamado,
of course, we need to invite everyone to join us, and I would like to thank the international cooperation organisms that have supported us to be able to build all of this when it comes to the economic terms as well, for the preparation of the different actions that we have defined for this work plan for RCM. We have held bilateral meetings in order to take a look at the cooperation. So without a doubt, all of this is going to be key for all these processes. So again, we'd like to ask you to join us, not only for the presidency, but for the upcoming presidencies, to provide continuity to all the work that we conduct as part of the RCM, the space where we can discuss migration topics with greater responsibility, and to discuss the challenges on the agenda. So we're going to have this high-level visit. We are going to have vice ministers and migration directors in order to take a look at the border with Darien next week on the 24th and 25th. We'll be in Panama, and then we can have more ideas to take a look at how we can build at regional level in order to have this support for the different populations. This is it, Luis. Maybe we can close. Thank you, Ana Irma. We need to close because we have no time. So anyhow, thank you, everyone. We have taken note of everything that we saw on the chat, and please be waiting for all the invitations, and thank you again for your participation this morning. And of course, as Ana Irma said, we will be working on all of this together on a participative manner on the agenda for the upcoming 4th Congress. And please open your cameras. We're going to take some screenshots. So thank you, everyone.
Nuevamente, muchísimas gracias. Había una pregunta ahí dando vueltas en el chat sobre...
Thank you again. There is a question regarding statistics on the elderly. So we have no data by age, but elderly women have been proposed for their needs. So I think that this is a space that we are going to take note of in order to identify possible improvements that we can channel with these organisms. Again, thank you, and hope to see you in the near future. Thank you again, and have a nice day.